hello to all of our guests that are in the dark there. We're waiting, a few more minutes for people to come on in, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, we should get.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Hi, could I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Would you mind just going over how to identify a maple tree when everything is bare? Just for, if you don't mind. Not
Yeah.
now, but
That's
okay, thank you.
That's a great question, and that's going to be part of the presentation.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's funny. That's something I would not have even thought of. That's a good question.
Well, actually, I'm glad that you asked the question because I might not have spent a lot of time on it, but that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Oh, thank you. It's just so hard to tell.
It's a lot harder when we don't have the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Where do you live?
Excuse me, I'm in Sharon, Vermont.
Okay. You're just a few miles from me. I live over the hill in Pomfret.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm on, what am I? I'm right off of 132.
My son lives off of 132.
Where?
He lives
Where?
a little right-hand bridge goes across the brook. It's called Johnson's Way, just as you head up 132 out of Sharon Village.
Huh, I've never seen it. I have to look for it. So it's on the right? I'll look for it.
Yeah, when you pass under the interstate heading up 132,
Yeah.
just as you start up the hill, there's a little bridge
Yeah.
on the right, and it's Johnson's Way.
Okay. Huh, okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
If you blink your eyes, you'll go past it.
My road also. I think most of Vermont roads are like that.
Yes, they can be. So we've got some more people checking in. That's great.
We're just going to give everybody a couple more minutes to get in here because we're right at 7 o'clock, and I know how these things can be. It takes a little longer to get online, so we're just going to keep admitting people. Probably another couple minutes, and then I'll let Vern get started, and then people can still come in as they join and won't miss anything as far as interruption goes. All right, I'm gonna admit people as they start coming in. I am Dawn. I'm the Director of Marketing at West Lebanon Feed and Supply, and we have with us tonight our in-house expert Vern, though he's not as in-house as he used to be. He used to work for us in the store, and he has since retired. But we are very happy to still have him as part of our team to present for us his great knowledge of sugaring. He's got a really great presentation for you here tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to keep everybody muted throughout the presentation, and then we have the chat function that you're able to use if you want to put questions up. But we are going to hold questions until the end, just to make sure Vern gets through everything. And then, you know, you can sort of jot down questions, or again, like I said, put them up in the chat. That way you don't forget. And we will get going here. And I do apologize. I'm going to mute myself because I have 3 very talkative dogs. I don't want them distracting Vern or any of you. So yeah, we're going to get going here. And like I said, just any questions, put them up in the chat or just hold until the end and we'll unmute you. You can, there's a little raise your hand button, and we will go from there. So you can take it away, Vern.
Thank you, Dawn. Dawn's here providing the technical support for us. It's the first time we've done one quite like this, so it's a little bit new to me, but I think we're in good hands, and I think we can make it work. So what I'm going to do is be sharing my screen with slides and some pictures and such. But while I'm doing this, just a little bit about myself. I'm a lifelong Vermonter. I live in Pomfret, Vermont, and I've been sugaring. I should say I've been around sugaring my whole life. And I've always been very interested and fascinated by it. I started sugaring myself in 2012. And what I did is I basically sold my sap to a neighbor. It has 25,000 taps. That's what he does for his livelihood. And then about 3 years ago, one reason I retired, I built my own sugar house. And last year we made our own syrup for the very first time. And I do have some pictures of that I'll show you as well. So I know if we're in person, we could talk a little bit more about each of you, but I think we'll get a chance at the end. Can everybody hear me okay? I assume everybody can hear me. Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. Got it. So what I want to talk about, I'm going to go through these slides, but there are a few basics I want to start with. So I don't know what your understanding level is, but if I go into weeds too much, just, wave your hands or something. But I usually ask people if they know what SAP is. I know it sounds like a funny question, but what are the basic components of SAP? And what it is, it's 97 to 98% water, sucrose, and then about 0.1% trace minerals. The trace minerals are where it gets its color and distinctive flavors and such. And before I start the slides, I'll just talk a little bit about how sap flows in the tree. At night, we have to have above freezing conditions in the daytime and below freezing conditions at night for what classically is called sap flow. So what happens inside the tree, it's starting to get ready for spring and photosynthesis to make leaves on the very tips of the trees. So part of that process, this is the beginning of it, it feeds those buds at the very tips of the tree. By the tree at night goes under a vacuum and it draws up the water and the mineral content from the feeder roots in the ground and goes up through the sapwood out to the very tips of the tree. If you were to drill a hole, now this has actually been done in a tree, and put a vacuum gauge in it at night, you would see that it would draw a vacuum. So what happens the next day is as it warms up, the very tips start to thaw first, the tree actually goes under a pressure. So if we drill a hole into the sapwood, the pressure inside the tree is what gives us the sap and pushes the sap out. So I'm going to go through these slides, and I try not to go too fast because I like to save time for people to ask questions. I find that's very useful, and we always get great questions. So again, this is one of our backyard living series. We've been doing this for, I've been doing it for a few years now. I'm not sure exactly how many, but so this is just an overview. What we're going to be talking about. tapping other trees, identifying the trees. I've had somebody ask about that, but we're going to be talking about that. And going through the process of making the actual syrup and processing it. And then I do have some recipes at the end for people who want to try to make some different things out of them. So here we'll start into talking about identifying the maple trees. Of course, it's a lot easier to identify maple trees when the leaves are on, but at this point in the date, we don't have that luxury of doing it. So we have to use the bark is primarily how we do it. We have two kinds of maples trees. We have the classic sugar maple, and we have what's called a soft or a red maple. There are some areas that have a couple others like black and silver. I have a silver leaf maple tree in my dooryard, but it was planted there. And most of the silver leaf maple trees, I believe, were planted, and they're not native to our area. So if you were able to see the buds on a classic sugar maple, they're one of the hardwood deciduous trees that we have in the Northeast. The buds are opposite each other on the stem. And when the leaves come out, pay attention and look at that just for fun. You'll see the leaves come out opposite each other. I believe there's only one other hardwood tree that's native to us that does that. And that's, I believe, an ash tree. So that obviously is one way to help you identify it, but it's not going to help you this sugar season. On the right, I hope everybody can see the bark on that tree. That is very, very classic sugar maple. Now that's what I call a mature sugar maple. They're grayish. They're different tones of gray, and they're kind of rough. Can everybody see that maple okay? Okay, good. So here's a classic this is a sugar maple leaf here. Yeah, I'll go down to the next slide. So I said predominantly we have sugar maples and red maples. Red maples, or they're also referred to as soft maples. And there's a silverleaf maple there as well, but you're probably not going to find any silverleaf maple trees. So what hopefully you're going to see or have the most of will be the sugar maple. And you differentiate that with the leaves. The red maple has like little tiny saw teeth on it. And in the fall, when the leaves turn color, those are usually bright, bright red. The bark, I don't have a picture in my slideshow of the bark on a soft red maple, but it's classically rough. It's not variegated like the sugar maple, and it's more brownish. So if you do have some red soft maples, it will look a little bit different than the picture I showed you. You still tap them. Usually the sap's not quite as sweet as a sugar maple, and usually don't get quite as much. But in some areas of the Northeast, there are pockets that are lots and lots of red maples, and producers do tap them and make very fine syrup. And if that's what you have, I would certainly encourage you to do the same thing. So we have identified the maple trees that we have. Now, once we've identified that they are maple trees, we have to identify the good maple trees that will give us sap. So you have to look for trees that are at least a minimum of 12 inches in diameter. Also have the greatest exposure to sunlight. Now, obviously, depending upon where you're located, you might not have them exposed to sunlight. They might be in a dark area, and that's okay. They just do tend to run better if you get the good freeze thaw, and sunlight helps with that. And obviously, you want to have trees that are healthy and free from lots of damage. Because trees that are damaged, it takes their resources to keep them healthy and keep them alive. And I'll say this, I don't say it with any disrespect, but when we drill holes in a tree, we do damage to it. And I'll show you some pictures later on. But we have what's called tapping standards. And we have the tapping standards to help protect the maple trees so they can thrive. In other words, we don't overtap them so that the tree will grow more sapwood every year than we're consuming to get sap out of it. And I'll show a couple pictures of that later on so that you can see that. So here's a list of equipment that you probably should gather up before you get started. I mean, it's obvious you're going to need buckets, lids, spiles or taps. I use all 5/16, and we'll talk about, there are two different sizes, 5/16 and 7/16. The store has both. The 5/16 are the blue plastic ones, and I apologize, I don't have any to show you. And the metal ones are the 7/16. The metal ones are pretty classic for hanging buckets on, and they're fine to use if you're just putting a few buckets out and doing some backyard sugaring. You're going to need something to store your sap in. You know, it can be anything like a 5-gallon food approved bucket, plastic containers. Some people used to go to like Dunkin' Donuts. They've had food products in them. Places like Home Depot sell buckets. Don't use pails that have had things in them like oil, sheetrock, paint, any of that stuff. They're contaminated and you don't want to put food products in them. Apologize for that. You're going to need a defoaming agent. A lot of people like to use vegetable oil. Organic vegetable oil is good. Safflower oil works real well. Canola oil works great. People do use butter. Some people use a couple drops of cream. However, I just caution you using milk-based products that if you either sell your syrup or if you have someone in your family that has allergic reactions to dairy, you don't want to use that. I've even seen somebody use bacon that drips the fat in. I don't promote that. I don't think I would do that. And you're going to need some kind of device to know when it's syrup. And that can be as simple as a candy thermometer. It should be a good grade one that you can read fine increments. Or you can use a hydrometer. And I've got some here. I'm going to show them to you later and show you how to use them. And then you've got to decide how you're going to boil your sap. Are you going to boil it in the house? Or are you going to boil it outdoors? I don't recommend that you boil it in the house on the kitchen stove because the steam, wherever it condenses on whatever it hits, be it your walls, your ceiling, it makes it very sticky. And it creates a mess because essentially you've got to do a lot of boiling to get rid of the water. So doing it outside works the best. I got some pictures to show you of a fire pit my son put together a few years ago, and it worked very well. Camp stoves work quite well. Use a big like turkey burner underneath it. Those work very well. I know people, and sometimes they advertise gas grills. I don't think they work as well. The burners aren't hot enough, and you can end up burning a lot of fuel too. So then, of course, you're going to need fuel source, and you need your filters, and goes without saying, any safety equipment. Basically, safety equipment is going to consist of gloves. You're going to be handling if you're around fire and wood, and you're also handling a very hot product, the syrup, the hot syrup. Okay, here's just a few notes. Everything needs to be clean, obviously. Food safe. We're making food, so we want it to be clean as possible. A good location to set up, and you got to decide, if you're going to be inside or outside. Your pot and pan considerations. A big pot, the bigger the better. The more surface area you got to boil, the faster it's going to boil. So if you do have the luxury of building like a fire pit outside, if you can get a flat pan, they do boil faster. The more the surface area, the faster it boils. Okay, I get asked this question a lot. I haven't tapped my trees yet because we need to have consistent temperatures. They need to be consistently freezing at night. And when we say freezing, we don't want it to go too low because we want it to be able to warm up the next day. So the 20s is ideal. And if we can get the daytime temperature in the 40s, it's perfect. And we haven't hit that mark. I'm watching the weather very closely. I'm considering tapping my trees this weekend, but I got to see what the long-term weather is going to be. You know, this Arctic vortex we're having, I don't know what's coming behind it. But I do know that big producers are already tapping, but they're not tapping because the sap's running. They're tapping because they have to be able to get all their taps in by the time that the sap starts running. So we'll venture into tapping the trees. I went over a couple slides, I apologize. Okay, so tapping the individual trees. I think I mentioned that we don't want any trees smaller than 12 inches in diameter. So you'd put, if you have a tree that's between 12 and 18 inches in diameter, that will suffice for one tap. And if it's greater than 18, you can put 2 in it. And if it's greater than 27, you can put 3. And 3 is the absolute maximum that we should ever put in a tree. And before you put the taps in, you look at the exposure. If you can do it on the south side, that's better. But if you've got several taps in it, you should distribute them around the tree. So obviously you can't put them all on the south side. You look for any big roots or branches. That's generally where you'll get a higher sap flow. So that's a good place to put them too. And I've added another slide. I don't know where you're all from, or you're from Vermont. I know somebody is from Vermont, but I've added this in there too, because if you have property that's in Vermont land use, they have a little bit different requirement for the taps and the number of taps you can put in trees. Basically here you can see the difference between, I call the 5/16 the standard and the 7/16 the large. And if you have your land in land use in Vermont, the most taps you can put in a tree are 2. They do not allow you to put 3 of the 7/16. You can put 3 of the 5/16 in. So this might be a good place for me to talk about the difference in the sizes of the 2 spouts. If you were to look at the surface area between the 2, the 7/16 is twice the surface area of the 5/16. So you might say, well, I'll get more sap out of the big one. And that's actually not correct. They've done studies to show that you'll get as much sap out of the small ones as the large ones. That's because the tree is under pressure. And another factor comes into play. The more spouts you put in a tree, if you went crazy and put a whole bunch, each one of them is going to give you less sap. The tree is only going to give you a certain amount of sap. It only has a certain amount of pressure to it. The other reason I like the 5/16 is it does less damage to the tree and they heal up faster. A year after you've pulled your 5/16, the hole will be all healed over. Not so much with the 7/16. And what happens when sap runs, and I'm gonna try and switch and show you a picture here and under the screen sharing to show you what I'm talking about. It does what's called, it compartmentalizes itself. It's the same thing as if we got a cut and we got a scar. It leaves a scar in that tree, and it's darker in color than the light colored sap would. And what happens is the sap will never run in that area again. So hang on, and I'm going to try and find you a picture here to show you what that is, what it looks like. I have to switch a whole bunch of things, so it takes me a couple of seconds. Okay, can everyone see that? Anybody thumbs up? Yep, thank you. Okay, the top picture here, the little picture on the right, that's like a piece of lumber that's cut, it's cut vertically. And the holes, the tap that's up there, that is a 5/16. And you can see where the dark spots above and below the tap hole. What that really shows you is the sap runs in both directions. And that's what they call the compartmentalization. It's where the tree has healed itself. And we have the tapping standards so that we can ensure the health and vitality of the tree that will grow more sapwood in a year than we've consumed by tapping this hole. So over on the left is a slice through it, and you can see where the taps were put in the tree. And the sapwood continues to grow out around them in subsequent years. So maybe since I'm on this slide, this might be a good time to do the tapping demonstration. I know that was one thing we were supposed to do, but I didn't lug a piece of wood into the house. But I think this is, we'll do a virtual one here with these pictures because I think they're that good. Basically, you want to use a nice sharp drill bit. The drill bit here is specific to tapping. If you're only putting out a few buckets, you don't need to go and buy a tapping drill. They cost like 20 bucks, but those are for people who drill lots and lots of holes. So you can use any good sharp drill designed for a drill bit designed for drilling wood. What I do with mine is shown in the picture. I'll hold mine up too. I put a piece of tape on it because it marks the depth. So there are two different depths depending upon which size tap you're using. For 5/16, you drill about 1.5 inches. And for 7/16, you drill your hole about 2.5 inches. Now I use all 5/16, so mine's set for 1.5. And as the pictures show, that's got red tape on it. Now you want to tilt your drill just a little bit, not very much. And you tilt it for two reasons. One is so that the sap will drip and run off the end of the spout. And the other reason I just found out today is so that when it rains, the rainwater doesn't run back in the spout into the tree, which I thought was interesting because that'll cause it to stop running and want to heal up faster. Now, just below that, in that person's hand, is what you should be seeing for when you drill. You want to see what's in the left-hand side of the picture. That is a nice color, light cream colored shaving. That's what you want to look for. Now, if you get dark colored shavings like are in the right side of his hand, that's not good. It means that the tree could be injured inside. You could have hit another place where you tapped earlier years. But basically, if you get dark wood like that, sap will not run in that hole. So if that should happen, you just stop and you just try to drill another hole and put your spout in the good hole. So I'm going to try and stop here and switch back. I don't think I'm back to the slide yet. Bear with me. Are we back to the slides? Thank you. I have to go through a process to switch back and forth. So here we are drilling again at the slight angle, but I thought that other slide was a little bit different. Just to recap, the 7/16 inch tap is 2 to 2.5, and the 5/16 is 1.5. I didn't say this, but you need to use the same size drill as you're using tap. So if it's 7/16, you use the 7/16 inch drill. If it's 5/16, you use a 5/16. Just want to make sure that was clear. And again, talking about the shavings, dark shavings, to avoid, you need to drill new holes like we talked about. So here we go. Here is a picture of a tap that's in a tree. I want to talk about how you put the tap in the tree. Once you've drilled the hole, I'm going to use the word you tap the spout in and not hit the spout in. It's very important. Basically, what I do is I can do it in 3 taps, and you can use different devices. I use a little hammer like this, works good, but you don't have to buy a special hammer. You can use whatever you have, but you tap it in, and once it's in as far as it needs to be, that it won't go any further. Plus the sound when you hit it will sound different too. It'll sound very solid. And that's when you should stop. Because to go further and keep hitting on it or hitting too hard or hitting it too many times, you risk splitting the tree. And if you split the tree by driving the tap in too far, you've done irreparable damage to the tree. And you can tell that because you'll have sap streaks below the spout and above it. It's not, it takes some effort to do it. So it isn't something that happens real easily. So I just tell people it's better not to put them in far enough than too far, because it's okay if you come out someday and the spout's pulled out and your bucket's on the ground. Well, you just put it back in and you're back in business. It's better that way than doing irreparable injury to the tree. So once you get that in, you just hang your bucket and you attach a cover. Hopefully you got buckets that have covers. Covers help keep out a lot of the debris from the wind and squirrels climbing on trees and knocking bark off and such. It's amazing how much stuff that can get collected. So here, now we've got the tree tap. We're going to start collecting some sap into our containers. So you'll probably use maybe, I think a 5-gallon plastic bucket works pretty well with a good handle. So you just empty your buckets into it. First thing you do, if it's frozen, take your chunk of ice that's probably floating in the top of the sap and you throw it away, because it's basically mostly water. And if you do have ice in it, it means probably the sap is more condensed and a little bit sweeter. Now, if you're a purist, which some people are, they can't bear to throw the ice away. It's okay, because all you're going to do is boil it and it's just going to go up in steam. And you should check your buckets once a day. If you get a really good sap flow, depending on the size of your buckets, you may have to empty them more than once. So throughout the season, keep moving my fingers here, sorry about that. What's going to happen as you progress through the season, when you're starting to get closer to the end, you got to watch for the bud break of the trees. That's a sign that sugaring is coming to an end. Usually what happens with me is the sap starts getting cloudy and stringy, and it doesn't look clear and nice anymore. So I usually don't have, well, my trees might still run after the buds are out, but I don't collect the sap because it's going to taste very bitter. You're not going to have good syrup for sure. So, but when you get there, you'll notice a huge difference in the quality of your sap. And that's usually a good indication it's time to quit. And depending upon how many taps you have, you may be ready for the season to be over as well. Okay, here's just kind of a rule of thumb. This is kind of just a generalization. You can use if you get a good run is maybe a gallon of sap, and that's, per day. And in a good season, yeah, maybe get 8 to 10 runs. So if the ratio is like 40-1, in other words, it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup, you'll get, maybe if you have a good year, you might get a quart of syrup per tap. So once you do collect it though, the best thing to do is to process it as soon as you can. It makes a lot better syrup, and it's just a better way of doing it. It's very perishable. It does not like warm weather at all. It's like milk, but I would say it degrades as fast, if not faster. But if you're in a situation, let's say you've had a run and for whatever reason you can't boil it tonight, keep it as cold as possible. You can put it in a fridge, or what I tell people, you can build your own. Well, this year we've got lots of snow, so you can build something in the snow, pack it around your bucket, and you can keep it that way. They say you can keep it up to 7 days, but I would not want to try to keep it for 7 days. 2 or 3 days is fine, but I would really try to get it boiled in as soon as possible. The quality of syrup will be much better. So now we've got the sap. We're going to begin the boiling process. So I think I mentioned earlier, if you got nice, large, flat, open pans, more surface area, it will boil better. But if you're just using a pan in a house, that's what you use. So this is just a rule of thumb. You don't have to fill it full. You don't have to fill it 3/4 full. However, if you're using a large flat pan, do not put less than 2 inches in the bottom, because once it gets close to syrup, it gets very hot and it's very, very easy to burn and scorch your pans. So it's better to have too much than too little. Here's a question I usually ask. At what temperature does sap boil? And as the slide gives you the answer, it says around 212 degrees. Well, it's 212 degrees because that's the boiling point of water. However, we want to know, we'd like to be a little more exact. So this is what we do when we start. We take, you can either use your raw sap or water and you boil it, and you use your good thermometer, or I like instant read digitals, work really well. And they have those in the store too. You record the temperature that your water or your sap started boiling, and it'll be 212 point something. And then you add 7.5 to that number. That number, after you've added 7.5 to it, is what you want to boil your sap to become perfect syrup. So that's how, by using a thermometer, you tell when it's syrup and when it gets to that temperature. So if it is 212 and it's 7.5, it's going to be 219.5. So when your instant read or your candy thermometer reads that, that's when you've reached the syrup. So during the process of boiling it, you really don't do anything but observe, and you make sure that you consistently add sap as needed so that you don't scorch and burn the pan, obviously. I'll talk a little bit about defoamer. Once you're boiling and you've been boiling for a while and you're seeing the color change and it's getting to the point where it's starting to turn to syrup, it can start to boil over. It's just like boiling a pot of water with potatoes or pasta on your stove. Syrup will do the same thing. So they put what they call defoamers in them that keeps it in check. And I talked about some different products to use for that. I think just getting a good oil, safflower oil, organic one works great. Just be careful when you add it. You don't want to add very much. You might just take a little, you could take a toothpick or something, put a couple drops, or an eyedropper. Just put a couple drops and you'll see the foam calm down, because whatever you put in it will stay in your syrup. And if you use an organic oil, it's vegan based, as is the syrup. And if you put too much in, it'll make the syrup a little bit oily tasting. There'll be no taste, but it'll have an oily feel to it if you put too much. So that's the only drawback. It's not going to hurt your syrup, it'll just make it have an oily feel to it. But you got to add way too much to do that. But you don't need very much foam to keep it in check, defoamer, I should say. So as I said, it's going to change color, and actually the boil will change. It'll change sound and it'll change looks as it gets closer to syrup. So what you've got to do is you've got to decide if you're outside in a large flat pan, I would not finish it outside. I would transfer it to a pot to finish it on the stove pot, simply because you have more control over the heat and everything around it. So when it gets to be syrup, particularly if this is the first time you've been making syrup, I would recommend doing it that way. Another way you'll know when it's getting close to syrup, you take a spatula and dip it in, and it aprons off the bottom of it. In other words, a whole strip falls off. It is very, very close to syrup. It doesn't mean it's exactly where it needs to be quite. That's why you need to either use it, check it using a thermometer or a hydrometer. And I'll talk about the hydrometer versus the thermometer in a few minutes. So when we talk down here about being at 219 degrees, that's the 7.5 added to the boiling temperature of water, or 67 degrees Brix. And some of you are going to say, what does 67 degrees Brix mean? And I'm going to talk about that because that's where the hydrometer comes in. So as soon as you reach that point of it being syrup, remove it from the heat immediately and then cover it. You want to cover it because it's so hot, it'll continue to evaporate and it'll get thicker than you want it to get. Some people, if they're real good, they will take it to the point where it's not quite syrup. It might be half a degree off. And if they leave it and they know that it's going to be sitting out, it'll continue to evaporate. So it'll end up being exactly where it should be. So here's where we can talk about thermometer versus hydrometer. Is there anybody out there? Of course, I can't see you all. I was going to ask if any of you know what a hydrometer is. If any of you have been around sugaring, that's what the producers always use. They don't use thermometers, but thermometer is just an easy, basic way if you're just doing small batches. Hydrometer, let's see, how can I switch to myself from the slides? I can just stop sharing, right? Here we go. Am I there? Can you see me? Okay. So here's a hydrometer, and what it does, it measures the density. It's got a weight in the bottom. It's very, very fragile, and it's got a scale on it. It's called, this one has two scales. One's called the Brix and one's called the bone. I like the Brix scale because the Brix scale, the person that invented it, it's equal to the sugar content of what you're measuring. So when we say 67 degrees Brix, we mean it's 67% sugar. So to have syrup, you need to have 60% sugar. That's pretty interesting because you started with 2% sugar and you're boiling it to take it down to 67%. So to use these properly, this has two lines. It's got a red line that says hot test. I don't know if anybody can see it. And there's a blue line that says cold test. And your syrup will vary, the same syrup will vary in density based upon the temperature. So density is a function of temperature. So the cold test is standardized at 60 degrees. The blue line is 60 degrees. So if you take syrup that's sitting on your shelf and it's 60 degrees, it should reach that red line. Conversely, the red line up here, that should be your hot sap that you've just made. And that's standardized at 211 degrees. However, if you ever go to a sugar house and watch a producer, and I'm not criticizing them. I bet you'll never see one check the temperature. They pluck this thing in there. If it gets up that red line, it's syrup. Whereas you really technically, particularly if you're selling it, you're supposed to, what they make a compensation chart. Can you see that, Dawn? So that is what it should be reading based upon what the temperature of it is. That's what your hydrometer should read based upon what the temperature of the liquid is. So, and these are available in a lot of places you can get them. However, I have a very unique instrument. This is what they call a test cup. It's what you put your hot syrup in, and then you very carefully put your hydrometer in here, and it floats in it. And that's where you read what your density of it is. But really should be measuring the temperature so I know what the density should be. Well, this one, a young couple about 5 years ago developed and patented this, and it's got a thermometer on it built into it. So it tells you what the density needs to be of the based upon the temperature of the hot syrup. And I don't know if you see it, but that's a Bohm scale too. So that means the percentage of sweetness of the liquid of the syrup. So what you do is very easy. You put your hot syrup in here, and then this is going to read something. And then when you put your hydrometer in here, they both read exactly the same. And when the two correspond, that is perfect syrup. And if they don't correspond, you either have to boil it more, or if you've boiled it too much, you just add sap to dilute it back to where it should be. So let's see if I can go back to the slides. Can you give me screen sharing, please? I think did you disable it? It said you disabled it. Okay, thank you. We're almost at the end of the slides. So we need to talk about something that I really don't like to talk about because I don't enjoy this part of sugaring. It's filtering syrup. So I start by saying you don't have to filter the syrup. And the only reason you filter the syrup is for pure aesthetics. If you make, let's say you make a pint of syrup tomorrow, and you pour that in a glass container and you set it on a shelf in your kitchen. Leave it there overnight. You get up the next morning, you're going to have nice, clear, clean syrup on the top. And in the bottom, you're going to have some crud. It's going to all settle and precipitate. And what that is niter. And it's the minerals that have, cooked themselves. And it's, if you rub it between your fingers, it's a little bit gritty, but it's very, very fine. And it's kind of grayish in color. They haven't found a use for it, which is unfortunate. But what I've had a couple of people say, I don't like to be bothered with filtering it. If it's just for looks, I just leave it in there, it's fine. But some people like to be able to look at and show people or whatever and have just nice, clean looking syrup. I filter my syrup, and it is a little bit of work, but I've learned some tricks to doing it. You always want to, let's say you decided you want to filter it. You always want to filter it when it's hot. Don't ever try to filter cold syrup. It just will not work, obviously. And what you do is you take your filtering medium, be it, filter bags or whatever you're using, dip them in sap. So you wet them, because these filters or whatever you're using for your filter medium, if you don't dip them and wet them first, they'll drink a lot of syrup on you and you lose all that into the fabric. So you dip it first and then put your hot syrup in it and just let it drain through. Don't try to squeeze these because you'll push all the niter and stuff into the filter medium, and you don't want to do that. So you filter it. So that's cleaned all the stuff out of it. Now you can can it, and you have to can it while it's hot, obviously, because it's like canning anything. So the optimum temperature to can syrup is between 185 and 190. And you can use glass, you can improve plastic containers. A lot of people use mason jars because they like to look at it and see it, and that's what you have. If you're using glass, put them in some hot water and get them warm before you put the hot syrup in there. And I say you need to can it at this temperature. You don't want to go over 195. If your syrup has cooled below the canning temperature of 185, heat it back up, but just don't go over 195. If you go over 195, it'll continue to evaporate and precipitate out niter after you filtered it, and you don't want to have to refilter it. So if you can keep it below 195, then you put it in your containers, seal your lid, turn it on its side or upside down to seal the top, and then just lay it on its side and let it cool. Or you can put it in the refrigerator. It keeps very well in the refrigerator. Or you can freeze it. Syrup freezes very well if it's not hot packed. That's a good way of doing it, or put it in your refrigerator. Just some different ways that you can filter it. I think it's harder if you put it in glass. But if using mason jars, that's a good thing to use. But some people use these guys because they look nice and and all that. But the only problem is if you keep them on the shelf very long, light will degrade syrup, and it makes it become darker in color. That's why your plastic maple containers that you may have bought syrup in are dark colored. They shield it from the light. So I've added a couple things at the end here, just for treats. Sugar on snow. I've never actually made it, but it's pretty easy to do. You just simply boil your syrup down and it just becomes thicker. So 233 degrees is the magic temperature, which is pretty straightforward. This one is the one I'm going to try to do this year, maple cream. It's a little involved. It's fussy. You got to stir it. I'm going to take maybe a quart or two, and you have to stir it for like 30 minutes, but you have to boil your syrup down to 235 degrees, and then you got to put it in an ice bath and get it down to 100 degrees. And as soon as 100 degrees, you take it off and you stir it for like 30 minutes, but you can't beat it. You don't want to beat air into it. And then after it starts to finish crystallizing, and before it sets up, you got to pour it into your containers, because as it cools, you can't pour it out anymore. But I don't know how many of you have had maple cream or like it, but I really enjoy it. Now here's one for maple candy, and I've never made maple candy, but it's not too complicated. You just boil it to a different temperature and you cool it to a temperature, and then you pour it in molds. And then once it's set up, you can take it out of the molds. So maple candy is pretty straightforward to make. One of my last slides, I'd like to put some resources up there. Everybody at West Lebanon Supply is great, always willing and happy to help customers. Any questions you got, feel free to call. They're happy to help you. I've put my own email address up there. I very much like helping people that are interested in this, learning how to do it. Feel free to send me emails anytime you want, or as many as you want. And both UNH and UVM have extension services, and there's information on there. The UNH one pretty much covers everything that I've talked about tonight. So that's a good resource. University of Vermont's got what they call the Proctor Maple Research Center. They do tons and tons of research. And there's a free forum online, which I belong to. It's called Maple Trader. You sign up for it and you can go and do a search. There's just a whole wealth of information. You can ask questions. There's always sugarers out there that are happy to help you too. And they'll tell you, maybe how they do things too. And I've got a few more pictures here that I'm happy to share with you. This is a picture, my son made this a few years ago. It's a homemade, just thrown together outside in the driveway because I want to make syrup. I never made syrup. So he borrowed a pan from a friend and he built this out of cement blocks. And I'll just go through and show you. He put a stack on it, but he made it so it was pretty airtight, so it would have a draft. And it worked incredibly well. And he's got a block in the front so he can control the draft. And it was in March, a very cold, windy day, but you can see by the steam that it boiled very well. And there's an example of what I was talking about, having a wide open pan so you get more surface area for boiling. But boiled great. And we put pots around the edge for pre-warming the sap so that we could pour it in as needed. I've got here's another type of sugaring rig. It's a barrel and it's made to boil syrup. And the person uses the pans that they sell at West Lab Supply. These are stainless steel pans that are designed to fit on here. Those work very well. There's a company in Vermont called Vermont Evaporator. It's in Montpelier, Vermont, that makes these and sell them. And the neat thing about them, you can use them as a barbecue grill in the summer. They make some really nice ones, actually. And there's another picture of it. I think I may have said I like the deeper pans better. I just don't have to worry about them boiling over as much, but that little barrel stove worked quite well. I'll share one last thing with you if anybody would care to see it. And I'll go through real quick. I just have a few pictures. It's my sugar house I built. I'm pretty proud of. I'll just see if I can pull it up. Is it there, Don? Okay, thank you. So just I'll go through some pictures real quick. Cut the trees off our land. My neighbor has a sawmill, so he sawed the lumber for me. We're good friends. And we built a post and beam building with mortise and tenon joints. My son and I built this. We cut all the joints by hand. We use modern tools to cut them. I mean, we use hand saws and chisels and stuff. And we just handcrafted each joint. This is really the first post we put up, trial fitting to put it together. And these are called bents. So this one had 3 bents. So every day we felt like we'd made a lot of progress. And it's all put together with wooden pegs, still the old-fashioned way, mortise and tenon with wooden pegs. And as we proceeded, it finally started to come into place and started to look more like a building. My 2 sons are both teachers, so they like to have a lot of fun when we do stuff. So we try to make it fun. And then eventually it started looking more like a sugar house. And here's a picture of the arch. And here's a picture of the finished product. So that was a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun making that. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop there. And boy, it's been almost an hour. Wow. I'm going to open it up for questions. And hopefully we have some questions out there.
All right, so we do have a couple questions. First was kind of earlier on. Kathleen asked what difference was between a camp stove and a gas stove.
A camp stove and a gas stove. They could be one and the same. I think of a camp stove, they usually fold up to run legs. The ones I've seen have like big turkey burners in them, whereas a camp stove will tend to have smaller burners. Remember I said you need a hot burner. You really need the turkey burner. They're a lot bigger and put out more heat. So I think that's the basic difference.
Okay. Another question, you may or may not know the answer to this unless you're dabbling in brewing as well, but somebody asked if you could use a hydrometer that's used for brewing for this.
Yeah, my son brews, and I wished he was here. The answer is yes, if it has the proper scale. Yes, they do the same thing. But I don't remember the scale that's on a brewer's hydrometer, but if it's got the right scale, yes, you can.
Okay. Then we have Morgan and Jerry Harper who are asking if there are any more tips you can give on identifying maples without leaves. They might have been a little bit later coming and not seen those slides. So certainly any tips you can give, but like if Morgan and Jerry, if you do have more questions, this whole presentation will be available on our website as well as our YouTube channel, and we are going to put up Vern's slides, so you will have some visuals of what he put up earlier on if you happen to come in late. If you didn't, I'm happy to unmute you and you can expound upon what your question was as far as other tips and tricks.
There really, I'll just say this, there are really no tricks to identifying a maple tree. It's at this time of year, it's all in the bark. You're going to have to go by the bark. And I did put some pictures up there. You could probably go out on the internet and find some other pictures too, but you're going to have to use the bark to identify it.
Lee, I don't know, Lee, if we answered your question. I can unmute you. Hang on one moment. Let me find you in my list here. All right, Lee, if you have another question, Lee, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Hey, Vern, I had a question if I could chime in.
Yeah,
If
sure.
that's okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Thanks for doing this, by the way. This was great. It was entertaining and very educational. But can you talk a little bit? Yeah, clearly. And that sugar house you have is beautiful. So I guess I'm wondering, I'm a little unclear of how much sap I should be expecting in my bucket after I tap the tree. And I guess I'm supposed, and how often I'm boiling. So I'm boiling every night, it sounds like, if I can. And how much sap am I expecting, and how often should I check, and how crucial are these timelines? Can it sit in that bucket for a while, or?
Okay, let me start by asking you a question. How many buckets do you think you're going to have?
Let's say I can do 5.
Okay. The worst thing it's going to have, well, it's not going to run the same every day. I mean, you're going to have some days that won't run at all because the temperatures won't be right. And then you'll have some days that are stellar. And that's when you want to be on top of it because you want to get as much sap as you can. I think I said earlier, a good rule of thumb is, if you have a good year, you make a quarter syrup per tap or something like that. So if you have a good year, you should make over a gallon of syrup, hopefully. We just don't have the year. But as far as how critical is it to boil every night, it's not absolutely imperative as long as you keep the sap cold. You can store it and keep it cold. And we're very lucky we have quite a bit of snow, so you can make your own natural refrigerator outside and store it, in 5-gallon buckets. So you wouldn't have to boil it every night if you didn't want to. Or another reason you might not want to, you don't have enough sap to boil.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. How much sap do I really need to make it worth a boil?
Yeah, exactly. So in your situation with 5 buckets, you may want to have several. I don't know what you're using for containers, 5-gallon plastic buckets, you might want to have several. That way you'll be able to store some. And then when you get enough built up, make it worthwhile to have a good boil. I don't know what you're boiling on. Have you got a nice open flat pan or something?
I'm a total newbie, so I'm just kind of, I don't know, open to flat pan, sure.
Now, are you going to use wood or are you going to use propane?
Wood.
Oh, good. So go back and look at the slides of what my son built.
Yes.
And then, what I do is keep my eyes peeled. Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, there are usually people out there that are selling small pans. If you do see one that looks enticing, try to get a stainless steel one. That's the ultimate. Stainless steel is the ultimate, if you can find one.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Any more questions? No more questions? It's got to be questions. I didn't do that good a job.
Maybe you did. Oh, and we do have the stainless steel pans in the store. If anybody is looking for the boiling pans that Vern was just talking about. If you come into the store, we have a whole sleigh. If you come in and go right to the right past customer service, there's a ton of our sugaring stuff there that Vern frequents himself.
So there's an option for you, Lucas. Those pans are stainless steel. What's really nice about them, they're not square corners, they're rounded. So they're easier to clean too. So you might want to just check them out too. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah. I think I will. Oh,
then you could make your fire or whatever you're going to cook on to size to fit the pan.
right. Okay.
And last time I was in the store, I'd have to double check. We did have some of the double burner cook stoves as well for somebody who's maybe not looking to build something outside and get quite so hands-on, but we do have that as well for other people who are looking for a little bit easier setup and takedown.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up, Dawn, because that will dovetail into the last question about the difference between that stove and a camp stove. The ones that you have in the store have the bigger burners on them that you're going to want to have for making syrup. So that's a I think it's still called a camp stove, but it's not one you just has the small burners. It's the type that you want if you're going to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe the difference is, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe when I'm thinking camp stove, I'm thinking the small cylinders. And the one that we carry in the stove is going to take like a full-size propane tank like you'd put on a grill, right? Is that right, Vern?
Yes, it takes like a 20-pound cylinder. Yep, exactly. But sometimes
We do still have one in stock. Chris is weighing in. Chris joined us, our ordering guru.
you usually have one in stock if you haven't sold it.
Yeah.
How else can I help anybody? Answer any questions?
Lee mentioned that he said that there is a trick to identifying maples, saying they're one of the only trees that grow opposing branches. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Maybe you could talk about that, Vern, if you've ever noticed that or come across it.
Yep, I mentioned it early in the presentation when I talked about the buds. They grow across from each other as opposed to being offset.
Oh, okay. So it's like arms, like.
Yeah, that's where the
Oh.
stems come out for the leaves. They're across from each other. Of course,
Oh, okay.
the leaves aren't under the trees, so we don't have the benefit of identifying. However, I will correct it a little bit. I think it's ash is another hardwood tree we have that grows opposed. The rest of our hardwood trees, they're offset. They don't grow opposite each other. But I think ash is the other native species we have that does. But yeah, when the leaves are on, it's a whole lot easier identifying the trees. But you're gonna have to do it by bark. If you live near somebody that knows trees well, I mean, that's great. Maybe they'd be willing to go out and just once you look at a maple and touch the bark and feel it and see how it looks, you'll soon discover that once you see what they really look like when you go out in the woods, they're pretty easy to identify. Of course, every time I go in the woods, I look for them. So, you know, I look at them all the time, so I can picture them in my mind quite well. The worst thing that's going to happen is you tap a tree and it's not maple and you don't get any sap out of it.
Yeah, right.
You just don't tell anybody.
And you note it for next year.
Yes.
Somebody is asking, have you ever tried, Morgan and Jerry are asking, have you ever tried to boil birch sap or any other?
I was wondering if someone was going to ask that question. The answer is no, but when I worked at the store, I had a customer come in, we had a lengthy conversation. They were making birch beer and they were supposed to bring me a sample of it, but they never did. Long story short, it takes 100 gallons of the birch sap to make a gallon of birch
Wow.
beer. So I think it's a pretty expensive proposition. I don't know what it tastes like, so I wouldn't even want to try to make some unless I knew I really liked it.
All right, William Schaefer is asking, any cooperatives out there where you can bring your sap and turn it into syrup that you know of?
Wow. I'm not aware of any, but you know what? That would be a good question to put on Facebook Marketplace. You get all kinds of interesting things out there. I can tell you that a lot of producers buy sap, and what they might do is take it in exchange for syrup. I mean, if that works for you, unless you want to have your syrup back, that makes it a little more difficult. But I know some producers probably would boil it down for you and give it back to you in syrup in exchange. So if you know you have any small producers locally, might be worth reaching out to them. I mean, any of the small guys and stuff, they're usually pretty easy to work with. I never heard of a co-op that does that, but there may be one that exists. In the times we're in, that's interesting. Could see some new things sprout up.
Anyone else before we close up? And like I said, I'll have this up on our Facebook page. It's underneath the education portion of our website. We'll have the full seminar as well as Vern's slides. I should hopefully have those up for you tomorrow, so that you can revisit them, or you can print out the PowerPoints, or you know, sort of fast forward to portions that make the most sense for your questions. And Vern has graciously put his contact information into the slides, so you can contact him directly. And as he said, you know, the store staff is always very happy to try to help with anything they can if you want to speak with them. But you know, Vern, as he said, is very happy and loves to share his knowledge. So please do feel free to reach out to either him or the store to, you know, get clarity on anything you might need.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you get something out of it. And most of all, good luck and have fun. I usually start out by saying anybody can make syrup, and I should have said that from the get-go. You certainly can. If you know how to boil water, it's not much more to it than that. Just a few little places where you got to be careful, but just do it and have fun. Once you get the hook, you'll be doing it forever.
Thank you, Vern.
Thank
you everyone for spending your evening with us, and we'll get this information out to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.